Good morning, Dan and Amy. So we were talking with Rich Lowry earlier about some of the comments that Stephen Miller, who has been a behind-the-scenes policy advisor, speechwriter on the Hill for not a long time, maybe 7 or 8 years, and now really part of the inner circle driving the policy agenda and the way the White House talks about its policy agenda, along with Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, Miller making his really national debut doing all the Sunday talk shows, and Trump tweeting out that he thought Miller represented him very well.
So was Miller filling in for Kellyanne Conway because she got slapped on the wrist for promoting Ivanka Trump's fashion line?
That's the running war between Kellyanne Conway and CNN, not to get too into the weeds on these relatively parochial matters. And then, there's a lot of question about how much confidence President Trump retains in Sean Spicer, his press secretary. So it was Steve Miller's turn at the wheel.
So how do you think Steve Miller did? I mean, he went to, he took George Stephanopoulos to task on this week's edition of voter fraud.
You just claimed again that there was illegal voting in New Hampshire, people busting from the state of Massachusetts. Do you have any evidence to back that up?
George, go to New Hampshire, talk to anybody who's worked in politics there for a long time. Everybody's aware of the problem in New Hampshire with respect to
I'm asking you as the White House senior hold on a second. I'm asking you as the White House senior policy advisor. The president made a statement saying he was the victim of voter fraud, people being bused from Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
The president was.
Do you have any evidence?
If this is an issue that interests you, then we can talk about it more in the future.
Yeah.
He held his own.
Yeah, I mean, Clinton Foundation donor zero came across as a little bit petulant. I do think, though, that when it comes to this voter fraud matter, making general references to voter fraud, everyone knows who knows kind of things is not persuasive. Just provide some of the data. I mean, my little group of newspapers in Illinois was able to scrape the Illinois data from the Illinois State Board of Elections. We identified 25,000 Illinoisans that are registered at least twice. And we also identified in the 2014 general election 68 Illinoisans who, according to State Board of Elections records, voted at least twice. So if we can do it here with our limited resources, certainly the president's team can do the same in states or regions or localities, for that matter, where they say there is a voter fraud problem. I guess this is the point of Pence heading up this forthcoming commission on the issue. But, I mean, just talking in generic terms about it sounds... it sounds like you don't have evidence to back it up. And if you're going to talk about it, have at least some data points to suggest there is something real here. Because I think there is something real here, but I don't think the way that Stephen Miller talked about it, the way that Trump has talked about it to this point, is particularly compelling. For more on this and other topics, we're pleased to be joined by David Drucker, senior Capitol Hill correspondent for the Washington Examiner. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be here.
So your impression of what Stephen Miller's appearance on all the Sunday talk shows as the White House spokesman, means in terms of the goings on within the communication structure in the Trump White House?
Well, look, it's hard to say. I mean, they've only been in office a few weeks, and so they could be trying out different things. I think Stephen Miller is a good choice because he talks for the president. He speaks for the president so forcefully and without reservation. And what you want in a spokesman is somebody that represents the president's views and does so without hesitation. And so I know Stephen's getting a lot of flack for his style, and I can understand why there's criticism in some ways because, when you say that the president will not be questioned, and that's, one of the quotes he used in relationship to where they're going to end up on this executive order on immigration and refugees, it sounds a bit Orwellian, but a spokesman's job isn't to make nice to the press, and it's not to, tell people like me, as much as I wish they would, that, well, you got a good point there, and gee, maybe we should rethink things. And their job is to make the most forceful case possible for the president. And in that regard, I thought Stephen Miller accomplished that goal.
I was reading an article that you wrote last week about Trump tweeting and the concerns, that this might bring because he is the first president to use social media in a way that we've never seen before. Do you think there's any possibility that someone could get to him and reach him and tell him to lay down or lay off the tweeting for a while?
Well, I think it'd be a good idea, and I don't think he's going to do it. And when I say I think it would be a good idea, what I mean is, although it's, it's, at least he finds it very helpful in terms of communicating with his base. I think in terms of governing, where you're trying to sort of bring along a team of allies in Congress, and you've got cabinet secretaries that have to respond to you, and you've got potential foreign policy crises and all of that. I don't think that the off-the-cuff tweeting is helpful, and I think Trump could still be Trump without doing things like that. I think that it would actually broaden his base of support for other voters outside of his base that may like his policies. I mean, his policies have actually proven to be, some of them anyway, more popular than he is. And so I think he could expand his base of support among voters here and reassure allies around the world if he were to act in a way that was a little bit less disruptive. And so, in other words, disruptive policies aren't necessarily a bad thing. Disruptive behavior from a president, because a president can move markets and paint divisions, is not necessarily helpful.
He met with Japanese Prime Minister Abe over the weekend, played a little golf, had a little high five, all that jazz. But on Sunday, while they were meeting, that little dictator of North Korea there, Kim Jong-un, was able to conduct a ballistic missile test. So we got ballistic missile tests in Iran, we got ballistic missile tests in North Korea, the axis of evil countries, as they were termed once upon a time. Abe said that the launch was absolutely intolerable, demanded North Korea fully comply with UN resolutions banning such activity. I'm not sure how much weight that carries, and there's some suggestion that his conversation, Trump's, with Jinping of China may be helpful in quelling little Kim Jong-un in North Korea. But, these geopolitical matters with these countries present some interruptions at minimum to Trump's domestic policy agenda, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And look, this is what every president faces, is that the world intrudes on your agenda, your timeline, and, how you think everything's going to go. And so I think this is what Trump is going to figure out real quickly. I mean, I think in one sense it was very interesting because after all of his talk on the campaign trail that all of our allies are taking us to the cleaners with the fact that we defend them, what we found is that in his press conference with Prime Minister Abe on Friday, he said he thanked the Japanese government for hosting our armed forces. I thought that was the most interesting and important comment of the entire weekend. And then after North Korea, did what it did, which is, keeping within character for them over the past 20 years or so, they immediately went on camera. He said that we were going to defend our ally. And so, to me, the only thing about that was he never mentioned South Korea, who is, basically Seoul is like a suburb of North Korea and would take the brunt of any North Korean aggression. So, curious to see what he says about that. But what you saw really from the golf course diplomacy and the treatment of the Prime Minister from Japan was pretty standard, Republican, Democratic diplomacy 101. And nothing out of the ordinary.
And that's a good thing.
Important. Yeah, and that was important. Thought that was important. It sent an important signal to our allies who've been nervous because of what Trump says. It sent an important signal to our adversaries because of what Trump says. And so, of course, we have to see now what follows from it because he can zigzag. But, I think for people that were worried that he was just going to completely close up shop and bring everything home, and depend on the two oceans to keep us safe, I think so far that's not necessarily the case.
He is David Drucker, senior Capitol Hill correspondent for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. David, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.